in Munich, and we're sitting down with Claude Johnson. How are you?
Sehr gut, danke.
We will talk about the Black Five's history and also the collaboration with 47 brand. But before we dive into that, could you maybe just introduce yourself a little bit and talk about your background?
Sure. So my name is Claude Johnson, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Black Fives Foundation. And the Black Fives Foundation is a nonprofit in America. We're based out of the New York City area, and we deal with the history of African American basketball teams that played before the NBA all the way back to the early 1900s. And we take that history and we go into schools and we teach the life lessons to students of this history that the pioneers experienced and these early original teams that paved the way for the NBA. If they did that, if they succeeded against those kind of odds that were going on in America at that time, then we say, okay, if they did that, then what is it about their success that we can learn from today?
Okay, so we read a little bit about you, and we found out that you have a very interesting professional background as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, the thing about it is, I started out, I was working at the NBA. That's when I discovered that there were dozens of African American basketball teams, and the league was not really doing anything with this history. So I decided to go and just find out more. And it took research and going to the library and going to the microfilm, and I found out that there were these dozens of teams back to the early 1900s. And as I was discovering these teams, at first I knew that there was going to be an opportunity for apparel because these teams had great logos and great names. But also I realized that I should trademark the names and the logos, because one day maybe there would be a collection of material that could appeal to youth, because a part of me always wanted to use this history to give back and to find a way to engage kids in schools, and what better way to talk and have the language, which really these apparel pieces are just more like a language. They're t-shirts and caps, but they're also a story.
You seem to know a lot about that era. Is that something you researched, or did you know about this before because it was like some kind of hobby, maybe you're a history fan?
No, I mean, I've always liked history. I always kept things, but when I was working at the NBA, I was the director of international licensing. And as a matter of fact, while I was with that organization, I came to ISPO in Munich once or twice. I remember that was a really cool time, always coming to Munich. And but what I did is while the NBA was celebrating their 50th anniversary in 1996, I began to realize there were all these other teams, but they're not recognizing those teams. They published an 800-page book called the NBA Encyclopedia of Basketball, and it had 800 pages, and only 3 pages were devoted to these earlier black teams. But I knew there were more teams because Arthur Ashe, the tennis legend, had written a book called The Hard Road to Glory, which was about the African American athlete, the history of African American athletes, and he had many pages on basketball and a few pages on some of these earlier teams, just listing the names.
Okay.
And I thought, wow, these names are so cool. You couldn't make these names up. The Smart Set Athletic Club, the Independent Pleasure Club. These are names that you couldn't really make that up. The New York Renaissance. And so I began to study them. Nobody knew anything. The Hall of Fame didn't know. The NBA historian didn't know anything. And I realized you have to do that research yourself. So I started going to the library in Harlem and wherever I could go, and found out that there were just all these teams. I mean, every week in the newspaper they would have the stories of the teams and the records and who was the champion. And then that just began my love of this history. I try to connect it to my own family background, because my grandfather and grandmother moved from the South to Chicago, during that time when they had lynchings and racism down there, Jim Crow. my dad grew up, in Chicago. He met my mom. Meine Mutter ist Deutsche gewesen aus Frankfurt. Ich spreche ein bisschen Frankfurterisch, aber ich bin eigentlich ein gebürtiger Wiener. So he met my mom in a jazz club in Germany, and they fell in love, got married, and he was in the army. And but after the army, he moved to Vienna to get a college degree, and so that's why 4 of my 5 of us siblings are born in Vienna. So we always spoke German. So that part of it, and the jazz part, and the music part, and the way that basketball and sports can bring people together and find common ground, I've always been attracted to that. And so trying to bring all that together in one story. It's, by the way, really awesome to be here in KICKZ, because this is the first time that Black Fives, this collection, has been represented in the EU, and in such a big way and such a prolific way as you guys have done. It's really awesome, and it's one more example of how basketball brings people together.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So I guess you could say it. For you, it started out as kind of a hobby to research them in your free time.
Yeah.
But it must have been very hard to, search for the information and find something. And could you tell a little bit more about how you actually found out about some teams or?
Sure. It's been so amazing. Thank you. I mean, at first it was, I would go down to the. First of all, I didn't even know how to do the research.
Yeah.
Like I called up the publisher of Arthur Ashe's book, and I was like, how did you guys know about these teams?
Yeah.
And this was before all the archives were digitized.
Yeah.
So eventually I realized, okay, you have to go to the library, and you go to the microfilm. But I didn't know where to look, so I just started at the beginning, and I was going through microfilm, pages and pages. My eyes were, watering. And I would go on weekends, I would go at night, vacation time, and just wherever I could, and I started to realize, okay, this is just, it's all there. All the information is there. And I kept wondering, how come nobody's ever done this before? Because it was right there. I mean, it wasn't even hidden. It wasn't like people were trying to keep it from you, or, it's just nobody knew. And I have a feeling that, nobody studied it because when this ended, when the NBA finally hired black players in 1950, the NBA just took off. The NCAA, which is college, just took off. The Globetrotters, which was a spin-off of this era, took off. And there was no reason to look back and talk about these earlier teams. They didn't. It's not that anybody wanted to hide it or that there was anything wrong with it. It's just nobody did. So when I started discovering these, yes, it was definitely hard. It was on my free time. This was while I was working at first I was working at the NBA. From the NBA I went to work at Nike. From Nike I went to work at Fat Farm for Russell Simmons, Fat Licensing. And then from there I went to work at Benetton Sports, which was Rollerblade and Prince and Nordica. And all that time I was working and doing this Black Fives work, which is
on the side.
on the side, which is a lot of writing, research, the information, and mostly the hard part was also trying to figure out, what does all this mean? What does it really mean? And meanwhile, my wife was wondering, like, what are you doing at the time? We're putting money into it. So it definitely was difficult. One turning point was. You remember how they had that throwback craze, with all the jerseys and everybody, and that was really big. It was huge, and I decided, my wife and I, we decided, let's see what can I do with this. Maybe there's something with the Black Fives teams, because I had all the logos. I had trademarked the names and the logos of these teams, even though they were meaningless at the time and nobody knew what they were.
Did you have to buy those to buy the trademarks, or who was the holder of the trademark?
No one.
Okay.
In other words, they were just out there. They're just names. I discovered the names. Who would? There's nobody in the world who would, try to trademark the Independent Pleasure Club of New Jersey.
Right? I would.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a great name.
It's a great name. And so, you know, I just thought, wow, what a great name. And some of the teams are obscure. They maybe weren't that important, or they weren't so famous. Other teams, like the New York Renaissance, were famous. They won the World Professional Basketball Championship, the first one. They were you know in that championship numerous times. People don't realize that there were 10 World Championships of basketball prior to the NBA even forming.
Right.
So you know, black teams won 2 of those. They probably could have won 3 or even 4 on last-second shots that weren't made. But it was hard. We created a jersey line. Got into it a little late. That was right when it collapsed, but it taught me that there was a demand for this knowledge. And right after that, school teachers started calling and saying, "Can I come talk?" And I realized, okay, I really love doing that. I really like the education part. The education part doesn't pay, but it pays in here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I felt like, okay, how can I shift this so that we can get more, you know, meaningfulness out of this. So that's why eventually we became a foundation.
Did you meet any of the players of the later era of the Black Fives?
I did, yeah. I was fortunate because most of those guys, you know, the oldest ones were they're no longer with us because they were playing, you know, in the latest 1940s, some of them 1930s, 1920s. So one gentleman in particular, his name is John Isaacs. He played for the New York Rens, or the Renaissance, Big Five in Harlem. And I met John, you know, in the 1990s, and we started to talk because I met him at this New York basketball event, and we became friends. And he was the last surviving member of the team that played in 1939 that won that inaugural World Championship of professional basketball. So, but people didn't really know that much about him. And after he retired, he coached at the Rucker Pro League in Harlem, and he did a lot of other stuff in basketball, but he also eventually just became a youth counselor at a Boys and Girls Club in the Bronx. And he ended up working at this Boys and Girls Club for over 50 years as a youth counselor. And so several years ago, you know, he died in 2009. We became friends before that, and I made him a technical advisor for Black Fives back then, because it was right around the time of the jerseys. I was telling you about the throwback jerseys.
Yeah.
And I was asking him, how did that Reds jersey look, and what was the color, and all the stories. So we got him on video. We got a lot of footage of him, you know, me and him talking. And one thing that we did is, so these guys made $125 a month. They got per diem, which was, you know, a certain amount per day. But they also, it didn't matter how many games they played that day. They still got the same amount of meal money.
And they played more than one game?
Sometimes they played more than one game, yeah. So in 1932-33 season, this team won 88 straight games in 86 days. So that was typical. They would play 150 games a year, and they would travel all around the country to small towns all over the place. And they weren't, you know, they were invited to these towns because this was during the Depression, the Great Depression in the United States, and also it was during Jim Crow. So in a way, it's interesting because they were still invited to those towns. The reason was people loved basketball, and they also wanted a novelty, some kind of entertainment, some kind of escape from the hard times that they were, you know, having, you know, financially and in life. So, what happened is when this team came to town, or these traveling black teams came to town, they would attract people from miles around to come to that town, spend money at the restaurants, hotels, bars. There was probably, you know, gambling and betting on the side. So they were a mobile economy. And they did this throughout the Midwest, the South, not everywhere in the South, but certain places in the South, and of course the East Coast, Northeast, even they went out west. So when I met John, Nike was interested in putting some of these logos on sneakers for a collection that they did in 2006 called Legacy of Inspiration. and they actually put these logos onto some of their retro kicks, right? So Vandals, Dunks, Air Force One, Air Force Two, Air Force Three, Legends, Blazers, you know, a whole collection with accessories. And of course we hope they do that again.
Yeah.
But the point is, at that time, they wanted John Isaacs involved. So I said, why don't you get John Isaacs involved and he can help tell the story. So they flew him out, me and him out to Portland to their headquarters, first class, and they gave him a check, you know, in return for him telling the story. The check was for more money than he made in his entire professional basketball career, right? So I was really proud of that because that meant that our work, which was creating something from nothing, made it so that he got a really nice bonus out of it. And one of the other things that we do now in terms of advocating for these pioneers is to get them the recognition that they deserve. So I'm proud to say that earlier this year, due to our efforts to promote him and always advocate for the things that he did, his accomplishments and contributions, he was elected to the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Oh, he was?
In Springfield, yeah. So next month, actually later this couple of days, in 2 weeks, I'm going to go to Springfield for the enshrinement of him and his family. He's going to be there. So I'm really proud of that. And that's something we helped make happen.
Is he the first Black Fives player to be enshrined in the Hall of Fame?
He's not the first. The first African American ever enshrined was the owner of the New York Renaissance team. His name is Bob Douglas.
Okay.
That was in 1972. A few years later, a player named Charles Tarzan Cooper was enshrined. He was a center. He was 1979. Then it took 10 years, approximately, 1989, before this guy, William Pop Gates, was enshrined. And then it took another, 1989, 15 years for John Isaacs.
Right.
So we've always been saying, look, there are a lot of Celtics, there are a lot of Philadelphia Hebrew Association, a lot of all these other teams, right?
Yeah.
But what happened to the Wrens, who would routinely beat them
Yes.
all the time? Like they not just beat them, but beat up on them.
Yeah.
So they've slowly started to recognize, and they created a special committee. It's called the Special Committee on Early African American Basketball Pioneers, and they can directly elect players, you know, right through that committee. So I'm glad because we worked with them to give them that advice of how we thought it should be done. And so there's another guy, Edwin Henderson, who we've been able to get in that way as well, who was a contributor. He was the guy who first introduced basketball to blacks on a wide-scale basis in 1904. So he was an important figure in civil rights, and so Henderson, him, but there are many others. And on our website, we have a list of who we think are the top deserving, including several women who were amazing players as well during that time.
Did they have their own teams, the women?
Oh yeah, sure. So one team, also from Philadelphia, was called the Philadelphia Tribune Girls, named after the Tribune newspaper. That was a black newspaper. And they won 11 straight national championships in the 1930s into 1940. And one woman who was the star of that team was a woman named Ora Mae Washington. She was also a tennis player, but she was their key star. And you know, I believe that she deserves absolutely to be in the Basketball Hall of Fame as a player.
Right.
Yeah.